Hopefully, I am live. It says I am. Let's see. All right. Somebody put a 1 in the chat if you can hear me. And then we will get started here very shortly. All right. All right. Awesome. Hi, Stuart. Hi, Ohms. Glad you guys are here. I am going to go ahead and get rolling. As you can see by the screen that I am sharing, we have a lot of articles to get through today, so I am going to try to move through these a little bit quicker. But if it's your first time tuning in, or if you're catching this after the stream has ended and you're wondering what this is, my name is Rebecca. I have been working as an independent citizen journalist here on the Deep Dive Project since 2020, and I have been focusing on human rights issues within a couple of pretty niche areas that I felt were underrepresented at the time that I began covering them. And I'm happy to say now that the issues and the topics that I began discussing back then are becoming more mainstream, more people are becoming aware of it, and there is more in the press around the globe about these issues. And so this here today is a monthly newsroom analysis that I do somewhere at the end of every single month, where I go through and I pull up all of the headlines that were delivered to my inbox from the Google alerts and everything else that I have set up. I compile the ones that I think are relevant and significant. We go over them and we discuss what the implications are. I think it's a good way to keep a finger on the pulse of what's going on with all of these different issues, especially as time progresses and I start branching out into other areas. It's good to keep a finger on the pulse with what I initially began investigating so many years ago. So there's that, but then also it's an archive. It's an archive of the world that we are living in, the events that are playing out around us, the headlines that are presenting the world to us. And I think all of that is really, really important, especially today where it seems like there is an attack on knowledge and on the access to information and everything. So with all of that said, if you are a first-time listener, thank you so much for being here. If you are a returning listener, thank you doubly as much, because anybody can tune in once, but to keep coming back and giving me your support means a lot. So let's go ahead and get into it. This is a Spanish news site, and the headline says, "In Cameroon, the money they earn today is to eat tomorrow." It says Alfonso Cabrera is from Cordoba and has been living in Yaoundé for 9 years. I'm going to do my best on the pronunciations as always. But not to bury the lead here, this is about Opus Dei activities in Africa. It says yesterday, Friday, was 9 years since Alfonso Cabrera Salinas arrived in Cameroon. Oh, and by the way, this was published March 1st, so we're starting the beginning of March, and we're going to work our way through the months. Now, after the elapsed time, he acknowledges that he does not use the word mission for a very simple reason. Quote, "I am at home and I feel like a Cameroonian." This Cordovan, a telecommunications engineer by training, changed his life the day the prelate of Opus Dei assigned him to this African country with the mission of helping out and with young people with apostolate work or catechesis. Specifically, he was sent to Africa, to the African country to help with young people doing apostolate work or catechesis. Now he's completely absorbed by this task and dedicates all day to this commission, in the morning at a Zobi school and in the afternoon at the Onolonga Center, among other activities. Quote, "I'm a very normal guy who does very normal things," he says. So I bring up this article, one, because it discusses Opus Dei activities in another country, and it's important to keep in mind that this is a global organization that has a toehold, it seems, pretty much everywhere now, and I think that their activities in Africa kind of get overlooked for one thing, there's not a lot of media that comes out about anything that they're doing over there unless it's from within the organization's own media that they're churning out. So I think that is part of it, but I don't think that that should convince you that there's nothing going on there, nothing to pay attention to, because I can tell you that Africa is one of the first countries that I started hearing about back when I started digging into all of this. And I actually got an email from a schoolgirl, someone alleging to be a schoolgirl, I should say, attending an Opus Dei school in Africa. I won't say which country, but a country in Africa. And she described the experiences that she was having going to school there. And everything that she was describing was pretty much in line with the other experiences that we've heard students from Opus Dei schools accounting. Very rigid, very structured, the expectation being that Opus Dei is a presence that you become involved in. If you don't become involved in it, you're kind of, you're not accepted into the clique or the group at school. You're an outsider. She also alleged some pretty concerning things about eating disorders and other concerning things with girls in that school. And it was really concerning at the time. It's still really concerning to me. And this article illustrates that Opus Dei is very much still full steam ahead in that country with the activities that they are doing. Let's see. So where was I? Let's continue. Oh, and then also, this at the end is so weird to me. They describe this guy, this Cordovan, and how he's in Africa and blah blah blah. And then at the very end, they throw in this really weird quote. I am a very normal guy who does very normal things. He says, got to throw that in there just to like assuage anyone's concerns that Opus Dei is run by like lunatics. No, he's very normal and does very normal things. Sometimes these articles feel like, and it could be the translation, something gets lost in translation, I think, a lot of the time, but the way that things are written sometimes is really interesting, and we'll see that again later on. But Alfonso is convinced the work he does in the heart of Africa, is convicted of the work that he does in the heart of Africa where it's so badly needed. He says he's a strong defender of training as an essential tool for a better future for Cameroonians, because the key is that they themselves participate in this work since, quote, when they realize they can help is when the country will change, end quote. The objective is none other than to, quote, form an intellectual elite, not an economic one, with a sense of commitment to their country. You can go ahead and read the rest of the article. Really, it was just the line here about him being like such a normal guy and doing normal things was very strange. And then this second or third paragraph here where they are talking about how they're there to invest in the Cameroonian people, to give them education, access to resources, because when they realize they can help is when the country will change. And all of those things are true. But then the last line says, the objective is none other than to, quote, form an intellectual elite, not an economic one, with a sense of commitment to their country. Kind of sounds like a red flag to me. Like the way that reads to me is just it's very Opus Dei coded, in my opinion. And we know that Opus Dei goes into countries and seeks to infiltrate all levels of society: business, religion, socioeconomic, politics, the entire thing. And even though they will say that they are doing it for very altruistic reasons, the fact is, when you actually dig into it, there's a lot more going on there beneath the surface. My webcam just disappeared. I'm gonna dig into that and see. Oh, now I'm back up. I'm hoping that my connectivity here is going to be okay. I'm kind of working with a little bit of a different situation right now, so if anything looks weird or something isn't coming through anymore, either the picture or the audio, let me know in the chat. But this article and all of the rest that we are going to be going over today are linked in the source document in the description of this live stream, so you can go and read through this entire thing if you want. It's sad. It's sad to me because Opus Dei is sending people into parts of the world where these people really do need help. They need better infrastructure, they need resources, they need things that they are just not getting. And so you see a lot of organizations, and Opus Dei is just one of them, but there are many, many religious and secular organizations that are in these African countries ostensibly to improve things for the people who are living there. And it is an uphill battle for many, many different reasons, but people have been over there a really, really long time trying to fix things. And it doesn't really seem like a whole lot is improving for the people who are actually living there, the indigenous populations in these African countries. And I don't know, sometimes it just makes me wonder if we should just leave well enough alone. Of course, that's not going to happen. You know, I live in a country with a government who cannot leave well enough alone, so I realize that that's just an impossible thing to ask. But moving on. All right, so this is an article from Tiempo. This is an Argentinian news site, I believe, and this is a article about Paula Bistagnino. She is becoming a consistent feature on these monthly newsroom analyses, and I really, really appreciate all of the effort that she is putting to get these topics out into the mainstream in her regions and everything. The headline says, quote, "The government is responding to the interests of Opus Dei." Her investigation led to an unpublished court case against the Catholic institution. The figure of Manuel Garcia Mancia and the coincidences with the libertarians, quote, "They share a classist and conservative gaze," end quote. So once again, this is a translated article, and like I say every time, sometimes the translation, Google Translate, messes up the grammar and some other parts of the sentence structure. So I'll do my best to stumble through this, but there's some good stuff in here that I want to make sure that we discuss. So the author Gaston Rodriguez begins, "At the moment in Argentina, there is a judicial file for human trafficking in which the Opus Dei authorities are accused of having reduced 43 poor women to servitude for more than 40 years. The cause, unprecedented in the history of the organization and of the Catholic Church, may end in the Supreme Court of Justice," and that's the Supreme Court in Argentina. Quote, "With the appointment by decree of Manuel Garcia Mencia as well as judge of the Supreme Court, the government puts a picture of Opus Dei at the top of justice. Garcia Mencia was Dean of Law at the Astral University that belongs to Opus Dei. In his family, in addition, there were many members of the organization. Since the 90s, when Rodolfo Barro, former Minister of Justice, and Antonio Bogano, former Supreme Judge, were there, this did not happen in the country," says Paula Bistagnino, journalist and author of I Will Serve You, Faith, Power, and Discipline, Opus Dei's plan to benefit from one of South America's greatest fortunes. A thorough investigation into that great machinery of power mounted on a religious heart that puts it to work. Bistagnino's work exposed the modus operandi, mostly recruited women when they were vulnerable girls and adolescents, to carry out household chores for life in the organization's centers, both at home and abroad. No one like her to answer about the implications of an Opus Dei painting in the highest court. The author talks about the assumption of the brand new judge, at least for now, of the court and Opus Dei. Quote, "As soon as he swore, almost secretly, Garcia Mencia had already begun to push the ideas that he tried to hide when he was exposed in the Senate. He is the author of a book in which he questions the Voluntary Interruption of Pregnancy Act, or IVE, and which talks about a illicit industry of abortion, which was presented at the Austral University first and in Congress later. That is why it has already generated expectations in the most retrograde sectors that support it in its outpost against the rights of women and minorities, something that Opus Dei militates academically and in the church. Although the Argentine justice is quite penetrated by members and cadres of Opus Dei who are in the maximum court of the country, it seems to me that it is important and not in a good sense," end quote. So basically, as people are being assigned in Argentina to this federal case that is being brought against the Opus Dei power structure in that country, people are being appointed, judges and members of the panel and everything else, and there are Opus Dei connections with those people, which is not surprising to me. Opus Dei has a much bigger presence in Latin countries than it does in the United States or anywhere else. I mean, because it came up from a Latin country, so that kind of makes sense. So it's not surprising at all that there is an Opus Dei presence kind of running through this justice system in Argentina. But it is concerning, particularly in a case where you're talking about bringing forward a case against the organization that these people are involved with. Conflicts of interest are presented and everything. But Vistagnino is asked, from a more general perspective, do you find coincidences or links between the message of Opus Dei and the libertarian ideology? She says, although Javier Milei and most of those who make up this government are not people or characters that Opus Dei likes too much, they are responding to the interests of the organization. And I would imagine that it's because money talks. And I don't know a whole lot about how the government works in Argentina and South America in general, if I'm being totally honest. But I would imagine that it is similar to here in the United States, and that people with money get the things that they want a whole lot easier. They get the ear of the people in power a whole lot easier. And I would imagine that there's something like that going on in Argentina, because it certainly seems like there is something like that going on here in the United States. I mean, if you just look at in the United States, like the lobbying system or how lobbying works, it's like it's pay to play politics in essence. And I don't think it's very democratic, but it's literally the way things work here now, and I kind of feel like that's how it works everywhere. But anyway, she goes on in her response, this government also uses people trained at Opus Dei University, especially, as I said, in anti-right issues with a rather classist view of society. Many of the arguments against abortion come from intellectuals from the Austral University. He asks, can we speak of a period climate favorable to the interests of Opus Dei? She says, without a doubt. Much of what Opus Dei proposes from his view of the world, which is very classy and ultra-conservative, has to do with this time. Recently, the former Treasury Attorney Rodolfo Barra, who in turn was replaced by another renowned Opus Dei painting, such as the lawyer Santiago Castro Videa and Ursula Bassett, who is in the Chancellery, were presenting 2 books against abortion, they say, in favor of life at the Austral University. When the government took the distribution of food from social organizations, it was given to Conan, an organization of the Mendoza doctor Abel Albino. I'm probably mispronouncing his name, but that is a supernumerary of Opus Dei, and that has a child nutrition program with an ultra-conservative Catholic and classist view of guardianship of the poor. In this type of relationship, you can see how Opus Dei is inserted in the Milei government. And this is her book here. You can go and read the rest of this article in your own time if you would like to. It's really good. It's really interesting, but I wanted to mention it, wanted to bring it up. One, because anytime Paula puts out anything, I try to give it some good press, and then also because as more press comes out about this situation in Argentina with the federal authorities versus Opus Dei, I expect that we are going to see more stuff like this, and so it's good to just have that in the back of your mind. It's good to know that it's just good to keep in mind that the people who are coming into this court case, who are being assigned and everything, they have their own biases and perspectives on things, and that can muddy the waters quite a bit, especially if there's a connection to the organization that is potentially being indicted. So take that on board. Do with that information what you will. Right. So, moving right along. This is from a news blog, but the reason why I'm using this instead of a news site is I believe the main news site that I saw carrying the story was El Diario or El Mundo. It was behind a paywall, and I couldn't access it. So I ended up finding this, and it pretty much says the exact same thing from what I can tell. So I'm just gonna read this, and there's some good stuff in here. But this is about a CSA case concerning an Opus Dei former now Opus Dei numerary and a student at an Opus Dei school. And this topic is pretty upsetting, so if you, trigger warning, are sensitive to topics concerning CSA and abuse in general, maybe sit this one out. But the headline says, the Vatican orders the expulsion of Opus Dei, this is translated. The Vatican orders the expulsion of the pedophile from Opus Dei of the Gazzalueta case, a ruling that criticizes the victim's family. And it writes, canonical justice, it will be heavenly justice because ecclesial justice does not exist. This is Ana Cuevas, Juan's mother, victim of the Gazzalueta case and president of the Robbed Childhood Association, observing the canonical sentence of her son's case with perplexity. There is a screenshot of it right here, or a scan of the document concerning the pedophile Jose Maria Martinez Sanz, and I think that we should plaster his name everywhere, along with the title pedophile, because he is doing everything that he can to escape that. And he's already been convicted civilly, by the way, although ridiculously enough, I think I read that he got like a 2-year sentence for sodomizing a child repeatedly. But anyway, that was the civil court. We're talking about the church law here, the Vatican. Failed canonical judgment of the Gazzalueta case, the Vatican limits itself to expelling from Opus Dei the pedophile condemned by the Supreme. It was El Diario headlines the news. And it is that, although the Pope Francis has ordered to reopen the internal process of the Church on the professor condemned by justice, the resolution remains in the responsibility of the teacher and not in that of the work who boycotted the process. That was another thing. The way that Opus Dei treated the family throughout this entire thing has been pretty disgusting, in my opinion. But they boycotted the process as well and tried to discredit the victim, and it does not address possible compensation either, says Jesus Bastante, a resolution also criticized by the victim's family. The sentence, although in practice, revokes that statement that former prefect Luis Ladaria made at the time, calling to replace the teacher's good name because he was falsely accused. The decree does not enter into the matter of Opus actions, nor does it speak of compensation. So people have been kicking and screaming the entire way through to any type of justice or resolution on this issue. And if you have been following this, or if you live in a Latin country, maybe you've seen the headlines about this. This guy, Martinez Sanz, or whatever his name is, he's really something else. But they go on to say the proven acts committed against a minor and attributable to the accused constitute a serious cause that justifies the expulsion from the prelature. This according to Article 30.1 of the Code of Private Law of Opus Dei. This is the conclusion of the Gazzalueta case, signed by the pontifical delegate Jose Antonio Statue and the notary Jose Luis Perucha, and to whom RD has had access. The expulsion of Sanz from Opus is the only measure that is taken. No compensation is established, nor are there executive orders against the work or against the other participants in the process. Although in practice, revoking the statement that the former prefect Ladaria made at the time, calling to replace the good name of the professor as falsely accused, the decree does not enter into subsequent communications, which will have to proceed directly from the doctrine of the faith. A sentence that considers the abuses against the victim by Jose Maria Sanz proven, but that does not address any condemnation for the work, more than the obligation to expel the teacher until the calendar date of Opus Dei, and which, despite being ready before Christmas, it was delivered to the nuncio on December 18th, has been delayed until yesterday. The Bishop of Teruel has been able to free itself from other non-negotiable and unavoidable obligations. In the 14-page document to which RD has had access, it is verified how neither Opus Dei nor the accused wanted to collaborate in the process. In fact, Statue relates, quote, Mr. Jose Martinez Sanz maintained this decision not to appear before the delegate throughout the process, end quote. One of the accused lawyers came to abandon the process in the middle of it. The writing also accounts the successive attempts by Sanz to boycott the process, coming to request the recusal of the delegate of the Holy See, something that was dismissed on several occasions by Rome. So, again, like I said, kicking and screaming the entire way through this entire thing. And we'll, in a little bit, get another look at how this guy, Jose Maria Martinez Sanz, pedophile, writes and communicates. But after several changes of lawyer on June 18th of last year, the advisors of the papal delegate communicated their final assessment. It took Statue 6 months to communicate it to the Vatican and another 3 to send it to the parties. when you're dealing with the Vatican, you have no right to a speedy trial, I guess. Among the proven facts, the subjective credibility of the victim who suffered abuse and cyberbullying, as well as the persistence in incrimination with a uniform and consistent account by Juan Cuatro Casas Cuevas. Thus, it is read in the writing, we declare that it is proven that the preceptor asked improperly about sexual matters, although not, quote, a serious public issue by Sands. It is also considered proven that Sands showed to the victim in his office, quote, images of light women, I'm guessing they're meaning images of women in light clothing, and that Juan Cuatro Casas Cuevas suffered touching by Mr. Jose Maria Martinez Sands in various parts of the body, including his private parts. It is also proven that Sands demanded from the victim improper postures. Instead, as happened in the final sentence of the Supreme Court, which confirmed the sentence of, 2 years in prison for pedophilia for the Opus Dei numerary, nor the facts narrated later are considered sufficiently proven, referring to masturbation and anal penetration with a pen. In conclusion, Satui culminates, the proven acts committed against a minor and attributable to the accused constitute a serious cause that justifies the expulsion of the prelature, according to Article 30.1 of the Code of Private Law of Opus Dei. The proven facts, they avoid a special gravity, taking into account the asymmetric relationship established between teacher and student, between the tutor who accompanies academic and personal life, and the accompanied student. The sentence ends, which has already been sent to the parties, and from which both Pope Francis, who recovers from his bilateral pneumonia, and the prelate of Opus Dei have been informed. Let's see. I think this is just... Let me get this translated real quick and see what this down here is really quick, but I think that's most of what... no, there were a few more quotes in here from Juan's mom, Ana Cuevas. Quote, they are cruel and they are going to destroy Juan. Asked that question about canonical justice again. She says they are cruel. They do not mention the actions of Silverio Nieto, Ladaria, and Opus of covering up complicity and persecution of the victim and his family, says Anna, who insists that the sentence does not recognize that there were errors in the investigation, something that they publicly recognized in their day. And I think it was pretty clear that there were errors too, if you were following this thing or just like reading some of the news coverage that was coming out about this situation over the last several years. It's been pretty clear that this entire thing has been a mess. And in my opinion, like just from reading the articles and the perspective that I gained from reading those articles, Martinez Sands is just such a freaking loser. Like, clearly, he's a pedophile, he's a creep, and he's also just a loser. Like, the way that he's been behaving throughout this entire thing, requesting all of ththese repeals and requesting to have changes in, like, people overseeing the process at various points, and now he's there. I think there's another article in here, but if not, I read another article where he was talking about repealing this decision, potentially like continuing to fight for his good name. I found out that this guy has a blog where he has been writing about this entire situation from the beginning, basically like his POV of going through this situation, and clearly his perspective is that, you know, he's falsely accused and he's innocent, and this is all just, you know, so crazy and ridiculous, and he has to clear his good name. He's a loser. That's the nicest thing I can say about this very sad man with the balding head. And I think it's really, really sad that in this particular case, which was so incredibly egregious and violent and just terrible, that this should be the end result. I mean, at least he is being removed from the organization that he was a part of, but like that should be the bare minimum, right? Like that should be the bare minimum, not like the crowning achievement of the entire investigation. So I have a lot of sympathy for Juan and for his family and for the abuse that they have suffered and probably will continue to suffer because of this man and his disgusting proclivities. All right, we got another one here, but before I get into it, I'm going to take a look at the chat real quick. Hi, Prince of Peanuts. Hi, Boba Fett. Hi, Slick Dissident. Okay. Appreciate everybody who is tuning in. And if you are watching this after the fact, I appreciate that as well. So, this article, another Spanish news site, this is featuring Monica Terribas Sala, who is the director of the docuseries The Heroic Minute. I also left Opus Dei, which is available on Max, and it's been out now for over a month. So if you haven't seen it yet, I don't know what you're waiting for. It's excellent, and you need to go and see it, because a lot of really hard work went into getting these stories out, and the women who were brave enough to be a part of that program deserve the attention and deserve the flowers. They deserve the appreciation of people who are interested in seeing some kind of justice. So if that is you, please check it out. But the headline says, quote, "The recovery process to get out of Opus Dei through psychologists is essential." She has directed a documentary series broadcast by Max where 13 women of different ages and parts of the world denounce violations of rights and abuses in Opus Dei. The journalist Monica Terribas works on the development of a documentary research projects in Media Pro Studio. She has a PhD in philosophy and is a full professor at the Department of Journalism and Communication of the University of Pompeu Fabra since 1993. I am sorry for not being able to pronounce that. Her extensive career, see, it messes up the gender when you translate it, and then it messes me up. Her extensive career highlights her position as director of Televisió de Catalunya, TV3 from 2008 to 2012. She also did the morning Catalonia Radio from 2013 to 2020, and recently directed the docuseries The Heroic Minute. So Monica has a very extensive background, and this is her bread and butter. So I'm really excited about the fact that this docuseries was put together, and it was such a well done project. Like, go and see it if you haven't, and if you have seen it, let me know in the chat what you thought. Blown away. So with what global feeling did this docuseries end, is the question she's asked. And Monica responds, "The maximum satisfaction that a job of this type can have is that many unknown people from all over the planet start writing to you and telling you that this also happened to them, or stronger experiences, and they will tell me very similar stories. This means that the research work with the 13 women who appear in the series and with more who do not leave is confirmed. We are not talking about isolated cases, a few negative experiences, but a way of functioning of the institution that destroys the tranquility, independence, and freedom of many people." So the feeling when it started broadcasting on Max is that there were lots and lots of people behind it. I've had the opportunity to speak to many. Of course, Opus Dei should talk to all of them and repair what happened, because this is not solved by asking for forgiveness and saying that it is an exception, because it really is not. Well said, Monica, and absolutely right. And we're going to look at an article here in a little bit from somebody who has a very different perspective of this entire situation. And it's interesting to see the dichotomy. The next question, is that perception of being before something systematic, reinforced by the internal indications of the work, the most disturbing thing? She says yes, because when you interview people of different ages and countries and they tell you exactly the same thing, it is because it responds to a systemic issue. You see it when you read the internal documents of the work, and you realize that this is absolutely designed, and that it is not that there is a director in a center that proceeds in a specific way, but that all proceed according to what the institution sends through the many documents of norms and in order to proceed. A spiritual or center director in Ireland or Buenos Aires is not guilty, but this happens everywhere, and it is what makes Opus need correction. On a pernicious basis, if we are facing a work of God, the divine aura is present in recruitment, coercion, and retention attempts at very young ages. She says that is the most critical part, that a person of adolescent age enters into a logic of belonging to an institution with that level of demand, both of the body and of the head, when according to the statutes of the work, up to 18 years of age, they are not legally members, but that a 14-year-old person feels committed to giving his life from that early age, in which the personality is not formed, and neither does the judgment, and makes a promise of obedience, chastity, and poverty, and goes on to live in centers with this dynamic, shapes the brain and the way it proceeds. Getting out of that dynamic is very complicated. And that has been one of my biggest issues with this organization from the very beginning. The fact that they continue, and we will see some other examples of this. I mean, we kind of already saw it with that initial article that I read from that African news site. This organization continues to prioritize proselytism or apostolate, to use their own language, with underage children 12, 13, 14 years of age and up. And yes, it's all very good and well for them to say that according to their own bylaws, someone cannot become a member of the organization until they are 18 years of age, or the age of legal majority in their country, but they can still be involved in the same programs, receive the same type of spiritual direction, have a Opus Dei mentor at their study center where they go after they spend their day at their Opus Dei school. Like, just because these kids are not technically allowed to whistle officially at 14 and a half years of age does not mean that there is not something disordered going on there with the types of things that kids are being exposed to in Opus Dei. And Monica says it herself, you know, the statutes of the work say up to 18 years of age. Until you're 18, you're not a member, but a 14-year-old person can still feel committed to giving his life from an early age. Just because their personality is not formed, their judgment is not formed. When you're a kid, you just don't know certain things. Red flags just don't pop up for you because you're a kid. And no kid should be making a promise like that for the entirety of the rest of their lives when they've barely even gotten out into the world. They don't even really know who they are yet. And that creates a really, really disordered situation. And I think that if Opus Dei was serious about wanting to correct all of these problems and create a situation, an environment in which the issues that so many former members are reporting having no longer happen, they should really seriously consider pulling back completely from any type of apostolate having to do with minors. Just back away from it completely. If people can't join until they are 18 years of age, you should not have any interest in them until they are 18 years of age. And if at that point someone is interested in becoming involved in that organization, that's fine, as long as they are exercising true informed consent, as long as they know what they are getting into. And a child, a person who is not of legal age, who doesn't have a fully formed brain, is not capable of exercising true informed consent. And without that, you get into situations that are very, very disordered, very dysfunctional, and abusive. It's just the way that it goes. In my opinion, if Opus Dei would just leave the kids alone, maybe a lot of these issues would start to work themselves out. But, you know, that's probably not going to happen. I mean, there are internal documents from Escriva himself, writings from the founder of Opus Dei, talking about how it's important to get to people when they're younger, before they have a lot of kind of unfortunate and inconvenient opinions and perspectives on the world, and that you shouldn't go for someone who's over the age of 25 because they're going to be too set in their ways. AKA, they're going to have a fully developed brain and they're not going to want to be involved in the kind of shenanigans that this organization is allegedly pulling with children. But, you know, that is the state of affairs. And I don't know I don't know what it's going to take for meaningful change. I don't know what it's going to take for these statements to become more than statements, for the organization to actually be doing and following through on the changes that they are supposed to be making. I don't know. I mean, they're supposed to be getting new statutes. Opus Dei is supposed to be getting their final revision or whatever for the organization statutes submitted and approved by the Vatican like very, very soon if it wasn't supposed to have been done already. But I don't know what it's going to take for those statutes to actually carry weight, because again, we're hearing from people who are inside the organization within the last like 5 to 10 years saying that nothing has really changed, that it's all just talk and pretty words, and on the inside, with the internal direction of the organization, it's business as usual. Keep calm and carry on and wait for this pope to kick the can so that hopefully we can get somebody else in there who's a little bit more favorable to the shit that we want to do. So reading on this article, I'm going to read a couple of more points in here, because I just think, again, Monica is making some really excellent points, elucidating things that I have said and that a lot of people have already said, but again, just going to continue to drive these points home. So the interviewer says, in this beginning of recruitment, friendly and effective care is described, which changes when entering. And Monica says, there are two very important aspects at this stage: the connection to a spiritual director, or to a person who is the one who advises and accompanies you, that you admire and want to be like. The bond that is generated is radically truncated once they have whistled the name that receives the admission request. And from then on, the process of intellectual and emotional isolation is total. And that includes distancing from parents, from the blood family. Of course, Monica says, the family becomes the work, and that means that you cannot have friends within it. You have no private friendships, or particular friendships, as Opus Dei refers to them. You have people you are actually watching who meet the standards. If you are a numerary who has responsibilities for other numeraries or auxiliary numeraries, in addition, there is coercion of all your intellectual curiosity, because you cannot go to the movies or have a playful activity that you choose, because you are going to see the movies that they tell you and read the books that are allowed you, with which your brain is restricting the routes of entry of external information to the work, to the point that you no longer decide what you hear or what you read or with whom you speak, because you cannot have an intimate conversation with a companion of yours, because that is considered a particular friendship. And the interviewer says, I was struck by the term familiosis. She says, it is one of the issues that is most difficult to recover from, because if you, being a teenager or being 18 years old, are separated from the blood family and told that your family is the work, intra-family distances are automatically created, which then cost a lot to overcome, because your family had been absent of you for 20 years or 15 or for 10. Those brothers of yours have grown up who are no longer related to you normally, or those nieces of yours who were born and you were not, or your parents who have died and you were not there. The interviewer says there's a gender and class bias. And she says, class, totally. A gender bias, because auxiliary numeraries are only women. There are no men who clean, cook, and take care of household chores. It is the numeraries who are in charge of the administration of the centers, organizing and dealing with the auxiliary numeraries. There are no men who do that work. And there is a very clear bias of social class. That is, if you are from a family with means, with economic capacity, you are going to be a numerary or supernumerary, which surely you will not be as an auxiliary numerary. And on the contrary, if you come from a vulnerable environment, the vocation offered to you is that of auxiliary numerary. Let me scroll through here and see if there's anything. They're talking some about Pope Francis trying to get control, and then everything happening in Argentina. Let's see. They ask Monica, what other details would you highlight? And she said, I would like the people who are part of Opus Dei to see this documentary. I believe that this series should be shared in the centers and the universities of the work and in the schools, so that they understood from the point of view of the Christian faith what is tolerable and what is not, and that they could discuss it internally and make a critical sense about it. I think that it would be desirable. And they ask, isn't it a bit naive to think that such deliberation can exist? She said, it is very important to be able to correct if something is wrong, to know what is done wrong, because it is not very difficult. Opus Dei is saying that they have not had time to participate in the series, and that is not true. I gave them the right of direct reply. I want to insist on that, because they show a statement in which they say that the series was closed, and that is not true. The series was made by these 13 women, and I wanted the prelate to respond to them, because he believed that it was fair and responsible, and what he should do because he is the head of the institution. I think they have decided not to talk about the series in their environments, not to listen to it, but the impact is evident. In Max, he is number 2 at the moment behind a fictional one. I guess the series is the number 2 at the moment behind a fictional one, and it has been 2 weeks of premiere of number 1. That should make them reflect. The issue is in society, and they have to face it. And I think that's true. And I've kind of made comments or speculations and shared thoughts in the past along the same vein, that the longer that this organization goes without really critically contending with these issues, I mean, beyond just having like an email address that people can like send their complaints to, real serious institutional change needs to happen. And I've made the comment that if they continue down this path of constantly refusing to deal with these issues, the corner that they are going to paint themselves into is going to get tighter and tighter and tighter. And I don't know where all of it inevitably will lead. I mean, it's kind of feels like a race against time, because Opus Dei has stated internally that they are going to cede without conceding, with the intention of recovering everything that their founder wrote when he created Opus Dei, that they're just waiting for the Pope to get away. And Pope Francis, for his part, is trying to do whatever he is trying to do. And it's like a question of who's going to get to the finish line first, and is Pope Francis going to be able to do the things that he's wanting to do before he passes away? I mean, the man is clearly elderly. He's not in amazing health. You know, obviously he had a pretty long stint in the hospital. So I think the fact that he has perhaps not all the time in the world to deal with this issue is a bit more at the forefront of everybody's minds now. And it's going to be interesting to see how all of this plays out, because I don't really know how this can all shake out. With Opus Dei, again, just not wanting to contend with these issues. You can go read the full article. It is linked in the source document. Take a peek at the chat. Hi, B. Lily. I'm so happy to see you here. Joseph Gonzalez, good point. He said the institution is fiercely defending itself, not just Opus Dei, but its considerably wealthy allies in the Roman Catholic Church. Yeah, I think if you are paying attention to world stuff, geopolitical stuff that's happening right now, if you are paying attention to what's happening with like the Vatican and everything right now, and all of these different religious organizations that are being suppressed right now, you would have to be blind not to recognize the fact that there is some like pretty serious stuff happening. For one thing, and I've heard several different people say this, but it is true, we're going through one of the biggest wealth transfers in recorded world history. People who had all of the money and have had all of the money and the power, they're retiring, they're dying, they're passing their legacies on to their heirs. So we have like this big transition of power that's happening right now. So I think that is a big part of it. And then also there's stuff happening just politically with that constant push and pull between, you know, the right and the left. You have that happening, and that's infecting just everything that's happening around the world. It's very easy to get locked into thinking that like the stuff that's happening here in the United States or in your country of origin, that's like the biggest and the most pressing, because it's in your face. So it makes sense that it would feel that way. But if you can step back and kind of look at the forest for the trees, it's really, really interesting just kind of seeing what is happening in the world right now. And it's happening in the Vatican too. And yeah, there is a battle. I feel like there is an internal battle for people's money and time and attention and everything else. Hi, Mike845. Glad you could make it. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and get back to this news analysis. So here's an article from the horse's mouth, from Opus Dei's own site. This is from their Brazil website. Headline says, "We encourage young people to discover and choose their own paths for themselves." And they are interviewing someone here, Lydia Villa, who has been in the regional advisory of Opus Dei in Spain since 2019 and is responsible for activities with young people. So let's just kind of skim through this a little bit. It says a year ago, Opus Dei launched Youth, a platform for young people within the site Opus Dei. Coinciding with this anniversary, we spoke with Lydia Villa, responsible for youth at the Opus Dei regional office in Spain, to get to know closely the training activity with young people that Opus Dei does today in this country, as well as the learning and improvements that have taken place over almost 100 years of history, the dreams and challenges that present themselves in the future. So there's her credentials. Let's see. In this conversation, we'll talk about young people in Opus Dei. They say Opus Dei is every person in Opus Dei. Catholics who want, with the help of God, to contribute to the evangelizing mission of the Church, being consistent with the message of Christ in our daily life, especially in work, and seeking to collaborate with the grace of God so that many people can know and meet Christ personally. Let's see. I'm just going to jump through here because I don't want to read this whole thing. So about young people specifically, they write, Opus Dei offers spiritual and human formation activities for young people with the aim of inspiring them to become women and men of integrity who live the Christian message in their daily lives, thus contributing to improve their social and professional environment. I think that's funny. Offers spiritual and human formation. I don't understand that. These activities are varied, also depending on what each person seeks or needs. It is a formation that seeks to encourage young people to grow in intimacy with Jesus Christ, deepen their knowledge of their faith, to serve others, to be good friends, prepare themselves to be good professionals and citizens in the future, blah, blah, blah. Anyone who's reading this interested in getting their child involved in like a religious or like a Catholic education thing, why would they not want to get involved in like some type of Opus Dei youth center? Because it sounds so wonderful, right? It's so shiny and like simple and cut and dry, and it just sounds so nice. I said that it seems that young people today are moving away from church messages and the Christian lifestyle. What challenges do they face in adapting? What challenges do they face in shaping the youth of today? Let's see. We would like the training they receive to help them have a positive impact on society. May they, with their study and their professional work, with their way of relating and facing difficulties, do good and improve the world in which they live. For this, it is necessary to help them acquire a constructive, critical sense so that they discover in each trend, in each situation, that life does not work as in social networks, in which you only have the option to decide whether or not you like something. That is so interesting. They want to help kids acquire a constructive, critical sense. That was also something that I would hear growing up a lot from religious educators. That kind of line is parroted very often too. It's very important to raise young Catholics who are capable of dealing critically and constructively with the issues in the church today and blah, blah, blah. But at least for me and from what I experienced, what I witnessed, maybe your experience has been different. For me, really all that meant, it wasn't that I spent a lot of time learning how to debate or learning about the Socratic method or learning about different types of fallacious reasoning or anything like that. Really, it was just learning the lines that you need to say in response to a question or someone raising issue with some aspect of church doctrine. It was really just all about having that like knee-jerk reaction, that knee-jerk thing that you say anytime, whenever someone asks you, you know, that one question, boom, that's your response. They ask you this question, boom, that's your response. And it's the party line of the organization that you're representing. And you know, that I maybe that my experience is not typical of the norm. Maybe for me, you know, that was some sort of like I was in some sort of weird bubble or something where that was just the way that they chose to educate people. But I don't know, from what I have seen and from the people that I've talked to, that idea seems to be pretty prevalent, and it's never about teaching constructive critical thinking as much as it is just teaching someone to have those talking points hammered out and to have the right things to say whenever anyone asks any questions. And from what I've learned about Opus Dei and Opus Dei members and the way that Opus Dei members will respond to questions from the outside, from the rest of general public, it seems like that attitude is applied there as well. It seems like it. Maybe. That's just my perspective on it. And then they say this: life people have nuance, and that's enriching. Yes, there is nuance in everything. But I don't think there is quite as much room for nuance here as they would like. All right, moving on. This is from opuslibris.org, which is a fantastic website. It is a Spanish-speaking website, but you can translate it to your language of choice. And former members have been sharing their experiences on this website for years and years and years, since like the early aughts. So now, you know, we're going on almost 30 years of testimonies, accounts, stories, documentation. This website is awesome. So if you haven't ever looked at it, you definitely should. And we're going to look at it today with this little article here. This was published on March 3rd. And it's titled The Impudence of the Vicar of Mexico. And this was written by Augustina. And I believe Augustina is the creator of Opus Libris, but I could be wrong. Either way, I see her writings on here a lot, and she always has good things to say. And this, she writes, "This Lord, whom Opus Dei made a priest without any vocation to the priesthood, has the audacity to affirm that the complaints mentioned in the docuseries are non-existent. According to him, the series The Heroic Minute deals with claims that, from their posture and position, have no basis. He assures that there has never been in Opus Dei uninformed recruitment, human trafficking, servitude, or abusive systems to manipulate people. He lies from his posture and position. If anyone knows of the problems faced by auxiliaries in Mexico, that is him, for his position as vicar. And as the man responsible for what happens with the Mexican auxiliary numeraries, he cannot forget the complaint that weighs on his Argentine brothers, also priests of Opus Dei, accused of human trafficking and reduction of servitude, after the complaint of 43 former Argentine auxiliaries. The problem is real and occurs under his gaze and responsibility." So this says Vicar of Opus Dei responds to accusations in the Heroic Minute. Down here at the bottom it says this was published in El Norte. This is by Dalia Gutierrez. It says, "Women who share their testimonies of abuse in the documentary series The Heroic Minute, I Also Left Opus Dei, deserve understanding, but the accusations they make are non-existent," said Carlos Antonio Nunez Aspiro, vicar of this Catholic prelature for northern Mexico, yesterday. Says that their accusations that they make are non-existent. In an interview, the priest stated that the institution has never intended to harm its members, contrary to what the production shows. That's all fine. I'm sure they didn't intend to do any of the things that people have said have happened to them, but the simple fact of the matter is that people are saying that it happened nonetheless. And so really, intentions be damned. It doesn't matter anymore what the intention was. There's a reality here that we need to deal with. We need to pull our heads out of the sand once and for all. Quote, "The people who appear in the documentary deserve our full understanding because they narrate suffering and it hurts us too," said the priest. "The documentary talks about accusations that, from my position and perspective, are non-existent. There has never been any unreported recruitment, human trafficking, servitude, or abusive systems to manipulate people in Opus Dei," he added. People published yesterday that the Spanish series created by Monica Terribas and available on the Max platform presents 13 women of different ages and origins who claim to have suffered different types of violence when they were part of Opus Dei between the 80s and the beginning of the 2000s. Throughout 4 one-hour chapters, the series shows how these women were captured in their teens, sometimes without parental consent, to join Opus Dei, a prelature of the Catholic Church founded in 1928 by the priest Jose Maria Escriva de Balaguer. Yes, that is, there's something here. Sometimes without parental consent. Something that I think can get overlooked because it's a lot more titillating to think about somebody being like kind of targeted without their parent, like a child being targeted by like somebody with ill intent and their parents don't know, and they form this like relationship with them, and then they groom them and they coerce them into joining. And that does happen. And I think that gets more attention because it's a little bit more gripping. But it's also important to remember that, and the Heroic Minute talks about this, that there are kids who are raised in Opus Dei families. Both of their parents are Opus Dei supernumeraries, and either they attend an Opus Dei school or they go to a study center on the weekends or during one day during the week, or whatever the case may be. Opus Dei is a part of their lives. They never had the chance to live apart from that organization. And for a lot of the kids in these families, it is just expected that they will also be a part of Opus Dei, just because that's what you do. And I think it's important to remember those kids, the kids that are in those Opus Dei families, as much as it is important to remember the ones who were never a part of it and got essentially coerced, allegedly groomed, coerced, and trafficked into this organization. There are a lot of different ways that people can kind of end up in an unsavory situation, and just important to keep that in mind, I think. But article goes on to say, their stories tell that once inside, they were required to comply with a series of norms, assume promises of poverty, fidelity, and chastity, as well as follow a life focused on work, apostolate, and penances, both physical, such as the use of sackcloth, and mental, through prayer. Opus Dei admits mistakes but rejects accusations. Although he denied the accusations, Nunez Aspiro admitted that throughout history there have been mistakes that could have caused injuries to some people. At no time, quote, at no time is there any intention to cause pain to anyone, much less those who are a part of our own spiritual family. When this happens, it has led us to reflect, to improve, change the way of doing, and not fall into mistakes that can be misinterpreted, he said. Vicker alleged that the documentary takes a very small sample of women, leaving out many people who have had a positive experience with Opus Dei. Regarding practices such as the use of sackcloth, Nunez Aspiro pointed out that it is a traditional mortification in the church, allowed as long as it does not cause harm to the body, to bodily health. He also commented that he has accompanied cases of people seeking to leave Opus Dei because they feel a great demand, which he attributed to misinterpretations. Quote, an accompanying protocol has been made, especially when they are minors or are in a vulnerable situation, so that they can report any situation that is out of the ordinary, he explained. And by that, I believe he is just referring to that email address that people are supposed to email their grievances to. That is their protocol for dealing with this entire thing. Just an email. All right, this is from El Diario. Opus Dei, the Opus Dei pedophile. Let's see. Failed canonical judgment of the Gazzaletta case. The Vatican limits itself to expelling from Opus Dei the pedophile condemned by the Supreme. So this is more of what we read in that news blog earlier. I think I wanted to include this to have more than one source talking about this thing. And this is coming from a news source instead of just a news blog. So I wanted to include it. It's listed in my source document if you want to read it. But just going in here, it says the proven acts committed against a minor and attributable to the accused constitute a serious cause that justify the expulsion from the prelature. Let's see. The sentence considers the abuses by Jose Maria Sanz, but does not address any condemnation for Opus Dei other than the obligation to expel the teacher until the numerical date of the work. In the 14-page text, it is clear that neither Opus Dei nor the accused wanted to collaborate in the process. Quote, Mr. Jose Martinez Sanz maintained this decision not to appear before the delegate throughout the process, end quote. In fact, one of the defendant's lawyers cut the process in half. The teacher of the Gazzaletta Male School and numerary of Opus Dei, Jose Maria Martinez Sanz, was sentenced by the Provincial Court of Biscaya to 11 years in prison for a crime of sexual abuse of a student, Juan Cuatro Cuevas, when he was in the first 2 courses of ESO. Subsequently, the Supreme Court reduced that sentence from 11 to 2 years in prison on the understanding the most serious events described by the victim, explicit sexual practices, were not proven. The brief accounts of the successive attempts to boycott the process by Sanz, who came to request the recusal of the delegate of the Holy See, something that has repeatedly been dismissed by Rome. After several changes of lawyer on June 18th of last year, the advisors of the papal delegate communicated their final assessment. And then again, they say that it took this guy 6 months to communicate that to the Vatican and another 3 to send it to the parties. Was he using carrier pigeons? I don't understand why it took so long. Because it says here that the sentence was ready before Christmas. But it wasn't transferred until yesterday. Yesterday being March 2nd. For the papal delegate, quote, the proven acts committed against a minor and attributable to the accused. Oh, yeah, they said that again. Justifies expulsion. Let's see. It does not analyze the actions of Opus Dei itself or the communications that were launched from the work to discredit the victim and his family. Quote, they are cruel. They did not mention the actions of Silverio Nieto. They have destroyed our lives and they don't care. They have no principles or values. They do not care about the poor, nor women, nor victims of ecclesial pedophilia. They do a lot of damage. I will continue to believe in God, but in the church, no longer, the victim's mother said. And I mean, who can blame her for having that perspective? Who can blame anyone for losing, for becoming disillusioned, for losing faith in this religious institution or in any institution that fails to prioritize the protection of minors and at-risk people? I mean, I think it's only natural, and I don't understand people who like look down on or talk badly about people who choose to distance themselves from organizations like this. People got to be able to live their lives, and it's so clearly so incredibly toxic. Thank you, Ohms, for the $5 super chat. You say my comments probably reflect on American politics. Yeah, I mean, and I'm coming from a very like North American perspective myself, right? Like I only know what I have been exposed to, what I've learned, what I've seen. I've only ever lived for, years at a time in the United States. So my entire perspective of the world is very Western, and that's something that I try to be aware of, especially when doing research like this, because of the fact that this is a worldwide issue, especially, human rights is a worldwide concern. But that doesn't mean that like providing that insight and perspective from what we've experienced and what we've seen is in any way invalid. We should be sharing our perspectives as much as we can with other people, because otherwise I think it's pretty easy to get locked in an information silo, and then you are only hearing the things that you're only hearing the things that you like to hear or that comfort you. So this is from the Catholic News Agency, which is a service of EWTN News. Opus Dei is all wrapped up in both of these. But the headline says, teacher at Opus Dei school in Spain maintains innocence after abuse conviction by Vatican. So let's see what they have to say. This was published March 5th. Nicolas de Cardenas wrote, a former teacher at an Opus Dei school in Spain has been asked to leave the personal prelature after being found guilty following a second Vatican investigation of alleged sexual abuse that occurred at the school more than 15 years ago. In what is known as the Gazzallueta case, or the Cuatro Casas case, a complaint was filed against Jose Maria Martinez, a teacher at the Gazzallueta school, an Opus Dei institution located in Lajona, Spain, for the alleged sexual abuse of student Juan Cuatro Casas between 2008 and 2010. There was a canonical investigation into the case, and Martinez was exonerated in October 2015. A Spanish court, though, sentenced him to 2 years in prison after a long process that lasted from June 2015 to November 2020. In June 2022, Cuatro Casas met Pope Francis at the recording of the Disney documentary The Pope Answers, which aired in April 2023. The pontiff then decided to reopen the case and appointed Bishop Jose Antonio Satui of the Diocese of Teruel in Spain as delegate or judge. Satui informed Martinez, who maintains his innocence, on Monday, March 3rd, of his conviction in the sexual abuse case that calls for his departure from Opus Dei. And this is what I had said about this guy having a fucking blog. As Martinez recounted on his blog, he was notified on March 3rd of the sentence, which was signed December 17th, 2024, with a note stating that he could not have been informed earlier because the bishop could not free himself from other non-delegable and non-postponable obligations. Martinez also emphasized the fact that Satue announced the sentence on the day the prelate was summoned to appear before a judge in Pamplona to defend himself against a suit filed by Martinez for violating his right to a good reputation. According to Martinez, the court appearance was postponed because the bishop has not provided the documentation that was requested, and other requested material is missing that the church has never made public. According to a document dated February 25th, submitted to the court in charge of the case, to which ACI Prensa, CNA's Spanish-language news partner, has had access, the postponement of the hearing was made at the request of Martinez's defense. The request for postponement was made because the notary Jose Luis Perucha, who had in his possession the documentation provided by Satui, claimed to not have the requested documents as documentary evidence. So these people cannot, get their ducks in a row. In addition, it is alleged that the documentation requested from the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith has not been received, and that at the time of submitting the document requesting postponement, Martinez had not been notified of the conclusive decree of the administrative criminal processes, i.e. the sentence communicated on Monday. Possible appeal to the apostolic signatura. Martinez announced that he is considering appealing the decision to the Apostolic Signatura, the only Vatican judicial body that, in his opinion, can stop this nonsense. According to the sources familiar with the case consulted by ACI Prensa, when the Vatican rejected Martinez's defense's request that Satui recuse himself from the case, they were told that when the sentence is eventually issued, if they contest it, they could turn to the Apostolic Signatura. So that's why, I guess. The same sources specified that the deadline to appeal to this court is 60 days from March 3rd, when the decree with the sentence was communicated. Martinez reiterated his innocence and insisted on denouncing what he considers irregularities of the canonical process, being tried twice for the same crime, quote, because the initial acquittal did not please the person who put together the ecclesiastical court, end quote, that, quote, legislation approved after the alleged events was applied, that Satui would urge him to plead guilty in his first communication to him, or that legislation that has been applied to any lay person was used. Legislation that has not been applied to any lay person was used. So he feels like he's been unfairly treated by this process and this investigation, essentially, which is freaking rich. The whole process has been a shameful farce. There has never been the slightest possibility of defending myself, he said, having already written a letter expressing great regret in which he requested his departure from the institution founded by St. Jose Maria Escriva. Oh, I think they were going to kick you out, buddy. I don't think you had to request it. I prefer to leave rather than be a problem, he explained. That's like when somebody says, you're fired, and it's like, well, I quit. It's like, well, you're out of here, either way. I prefer to leave rather than be a problem, he explained, while thanking the support received from many people in Opus Dei who know perfectly well that I am innocent, and emphasizing his adherence to the apostolate prelature, quote, in my conscience, Opus Dei will always be my spiritual family, end quote. Whatever. This guy's a pedophile, as far as I am concerned. And he can say whatever he wants, but I believe one. And guess what? That's my right. As a member of the general public, I can listen to both sides of the situation, and I can decide who I want to believe. And I don't find Maria Martinez Sands to be particularly reliable or likable. All right. Switching gears. So let's talk about this Miles Christi order. The Vatican has ordered suppression of this Argentinian Miles Christi order. And I thought this might be worth bringing up and mentioning because we've talked about the Sodalitium Christiani Vitae order, which is another conservative Latin religious organization that Pope Francis has suppressed. We've talked about that because there's interesting similarities between all of these different organizations that have been accused of having a cult-like reverence or attitude towards its founder or how they govern themselves internally, yada yada. And I think it's good to highlight the fact that there's more than one organization like Opus Dei out there. I mean, there are tons. There are all kinds of organizations that could be considered sect-like, coercive. You can find one for anything under the sun, anything at all. But this was published March 6th. It says the order's founder was laicized in 2020 after allegations of abuse, coercion, and manipulation. This is from The Pillar. The Vatican has suppressed an Argentine religious order founded by a priest who sexually abused adult members and abused the confessional to cover his tracks. So this might be another one that I need to do a standalone deep dive on. I think this would be interesting. It says the suppression of the clerical religious institute Miles Christi was announced by the Argentine Bishops' Conference Thursday, but approved by Pope Francis before he went into the hospital for pneumonia last month. The suppression is the latest in a series of moves during the Francis pontificate to address issues with religious institutes founded by abusive priests and to address governance in new ecclesial movements and religious communities. I wonder how many more there are. Miles Christi was founded by the now laicized Father Roberto Iannuzzi in 1994 as an association of clerics in the Archdiocese of La Plata, Argentina. Drawing on Ignatian spirituality, the members of the institute focused on spiritual direction, retreats, and other initiatives for the spiritual formation of Catholics. While Iannuzzi was a priest of Buenos Aires, the institute was founded in the La Plata Archdiocese after initial members of his group were reportedly dismissed from the Buenos Aires seminary. After initially floundering, Iannuzzi, who said his vision for Miles Christi was divinely inspired, was received in La Plata, where then Archbishop Carlos Galan was reportedly a personal friend. From its beginning, the Institute's critics and former members said that recruitment efforts were coercive and that formation methodology was psychologically abusive and sometimes degrading. But the group won plaudits in some circles for a reputation of theological orthodoxy and the appearance of robust commitments to religious life. Who does that sound like? Iannuzzi himself has also been accused of illicit financial management, using donations for unauthorized personal expenses, and hiding money from conferrers and ecclesiastical oversight. The Institute, which had fewer than 60 members, operated 3 houses in the United States, in the Diocese of Denver, San Diego, and Detroit, where clerics engaged mostly in retreat work, spiritual direction, and campus ministry. In 2016, the Archdiocese of La Plata began a canonical investigation into Iannuzzi after members of the Institute alleged sexual abuse and abuses of authority, and that Iannuzzi had attempted to absolve sacramentally men with whom he had seemingly engaged in coercive sexual behavior, a move which can result in a declared excommunication and is handled canonically by the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith. And that reminds me of Marcial Maciel. He was somebody who would also absolve his victims after he got done victimizing them, which is really sick. La Plata's then Archbishop, Victor Fernandez, sent a file on Iannuzzi to the DDF in March 2019. In February 2020, seemingly after a Vatican-run administrative canonical process, Iannuzzi was forcibly laicized. According to Miles Christi, the order's authorities were involved in the investigation in Iannuzzi and had attempted to expel him from the Institute before his laicization was declared. Let's see. So this is more just recent. So it says, in January, the Vatican appointed pontifical delegates to take charge of both male and female branches of the religious family of the Incarnate Word. They also mentioned Legionaries of Christ. Let's see. There's been a little public update about reforms to Miles Christi since they got new government. It says that in late 2020, Fernandez was expelled from the order, from care of a parish and school in the La Plata Archdiocese. Some members privately claimed the Archbishop had an animus toward the Institute itself and lamented that the Archdiocese had not given a reason for pushing the order out of its apostolates. It says that there's no indication that Fernandez was involved in the Vatican's decision to suppress Miles Christi, and the Cardinal is not a member of the Dicastery for Institutes of Consecrated Life, which formally decreed the suppression. So I wanted to mention that. Go and read through this a little bit more if you want some more information, or do some Googling in your own time. I think I'm going to be creating a research folder for this one, though, and starting to do some research into that, because I would like to know more about this order, because it's, again, like I said, reminds me of several others. All right, so moving right along. This is from a UK site called The Critic. It says, priests moving in mysterious ways. The further De Noël gets, the weaker and more credulous he becomes. I am not going to read this entire article, but the author, who I'm assuming is Andrew Cusack, says something really insightful here about Opus Dei, and I wanted to share it. So, and this is they're discussing a book that somebody wrote, for context. What do an Irish Monsignor, the British ambassador's valet, an eccentrically named Swiss count, a homosexual SS officer, Mussolini's mistress, an extensive trove of sadomasochistic literature, and the CIA's James Jesus Angleton all have to do with each other? Espionage, Vatican style, apparently. Yvonne de Noël's book, originally published in French in 2021, claims to lift the lid on the Pope's intelligence services, despite his admissions that they don't really exist. Even so, tales of spying and intrigue orbiting the Holy See are so numerous that an in-depth overview is past due. Vatican Spies is, alas, as flawed as it is absorbing. Sometimes de Noël simply gets his facts wrong, as when he asserts that the Order of St. Sylvester is the oldest and most prestigious of the Vatican's honors system. In fact, it is the youngest and lowest in the precedence of the Holy See's 5 knightly orders. More often, he simply misleads the reader with his lack of understanding. His take on Opus Dei is just one example. It is an autonomous, self-promoting entity pursuing its own agenda, yet de Noël portrays it as a secret police at the pontiff's beck and call. Grievously over-egging the pudding, he claims Opus Dei was instrumental in changing votes at the United Nations over the Algeria question in the late 1950s. Similarly, he can't resist attributing the 1973 coup against Allende to Opus Dei. Members were very much in the plot's milieu, but the group was far from being in the driver's seat. And that was really the part that I wanted to highlight, because this is almost always true of any situation. And I've talked about this in the past. I made an entire video dedicated to correcting or explaining my perspective on this organization, on Opus Dei, and how it has evolved since I began doing research into them. And something that I have been critical of and that I've seen a lot of articles make the mistake of, even some books, as it mentioned here, make the mistake of, is people really want Opus Dei to be the biggest baddie in the world. They want Opus Dei to be basically like the Illuminati, to be responsible for everything, tied in with everything, like they are the ones that are pulling the strings, and that is simply not true. And having that perspective, holding on to that perspective, it's misguided, and it kind of sets you up for failure for understanding this group, how it works, how it operates, its why and wherefore for everything that it does. If you come into it with the idea that it's this like all-powerful, all-seeing, Illuminati-esque organization, you're going to have a fundamental misunderstanding of this group before you even get into trying to understand the various events that they have been connected to over the many, many years around the world. And it makes me really, really happy to see that perspective and narrative beginning to change. I've seen Gareth Gore correct that narrative on numerous occasions. I'm seeing it in articles like this. It's really, really good, because I think that when it comes to dealing with organizations like Opus Dei, it's very important that we understand why and how they are doing what they are doing. And fundamentally, it is just incorrect to suggest that this organization is some kind of all-seeing eye, some big brother. They just not. But that doesn't mean that they aren't still connected to a lot of stuff. It doesn't mean that they are not still invested in a lot of these socio-economic, global political issues and the push and pull of the world that we live in, because they are. And it's important to be aware of that. But I wanted to read through that just a little bit. The rest of it just gets into this book as a whole, which I haven't read and probably won't, if I'm being honest. But I wanted to include that because I love that that narrative is beginning to change. Billy Lily, yes, you're absolutely correct. Opus Dei is not running the show, but they provide accommodation and space for people who do. And I've been of the opinion for a really, really long time that Opus Dei, you know, they have, and it's really clear. This is my opinion, but I feel like it's really clear if you spend more than a cursory moment looking into the leaked internal documents and things that have come out of this organization. It's really, really clear, to me anyway, that this organization is marching to the beat of its own drum. And any alliances that it makes, or that you see people connected to the organization make with other people in this world, I think are more to serve a ultimate end rather than that connection being the end in and of itself. I mean, this is networking 101, you know? Okay, get this one translated over. This is about some interesting stuff. So this has been going down over in Latin America, Latin countries, with schools now needing to, if they're going to receive funding from the government, essentially, they can no longer be segregated by like gender. And there are 2 schools in Catalonia who are resigning from concert, or basically like saying they're going to be fine without receiving the federal funding in order to continue separating their students by sex. And the schools in question, the centers of Laval and La Farga, both related to Opus Dei, will renounce public funds for the 2026-2027 academic year. And this was published on March 13th. And it says 2 schools of differentiated education in Catalonia will resign from educational concert in the 2026-2027 academic year in order to continue separating their students by sex. ABC has had access to a circular from the La Farga, which is the male, and Laval, which is the female, centers sent last Monday to the parents of both schools. They are located in the province of Barcelona, related to the prelature of Opus Dei, and they have made the decision to guarantee their educational project, although this may imply the loss of public financing. Excuse me. Retiring the concert to the centers that separate by sex was one of the objectives that ERC set when he landed at the Ministry of Education in 2022. With the Republican Josep Bargallo at the head of the department, the Generalitat took advantage of the new state law to materialize its purpose, to withdraw public money from these schools. Taking advantage of the expiration of the concerts in the secondary stage, the centers related to Opus Dei with differentiated education, a total of 10 in Catalonia, had to choose between losing the concert or continuing to separate students in their classes. Most chose to maintain public funding. Only the Viaro and Camp, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, schools decided to continue with differentiated education. Now Laval and La Farga are unmarked, and they decide to dispense with the subsidy and not give up their pedagogical system. Outside of Catalonia, concerted schools that separate their students by sex have also been forced to decide between giving up public money or betting on the differentiated model. Remember that the schools that separate students from students suppose around 1% of the whole of education. So out of all the schools in Spain, only 1% separate their students by gender, and there are about 70. According to figures from CECE, the Spanish Confederation of Teaching Centers, more or less than half of the centers that differentiate by sex are arranged. However, this proportion is decreasing and is doomed to disappear. There is a caveat of the Community of Madrid, who decided to extend the expiration of the concerts until 2027 in Andalusia, where these centers are privately owned. But it is not... Oh no, bring back my English, please. But it is not the general rule. In communities like the Balearic Islands, Navarra, Basque Country, La Rioja, Valencian Community, Cantabria, or Catalonia, except for the centers that have been highlighted in the latter, the schools that separated by sex have had to become mixed in order to continue receiving financing from the state. After the approval of the last day education law, known as the CELA law, an appeal was filed before the Constitutional Court. The Count Pompido's TC ruled in favor of the doctrine established by the LAMLO, in which establishes that the administration can encourage the educational model that it considers best, in this case, the co-education. Catholic schools and CECE, the 2 large groups of the one arranged in Spain, agree that in our country there is a strong ideologization. I don't know how. Why is that word giving me trouble? There's a strong idealization of education and the model that separates by sex. And this represents for certain sectors a return to Francoism. However, the system is claimed by Democrats in the United States and enjoys good press in many European countries, including the United Kingdom and Ireland. So basically, they're saying, so in Spain, having these segregated schools that with like a very strong kind of like ideological perspective harkens back to, for Spanish people, it reminds them of living under Francoism in Spain, because that kind of very regimented, dogmatic style of education and everything did very, very well in Franco's Spain. I mean, Opus Dei did very, very well in Franco's Spain. But then they go on to say that the system is claimed by Democrats in the United States. I mean, yeah, not just Democrats in the United States, but Democrats and Republicans alike have supported private schools, and private schools here in the United States probably look a little bit different. But there has also been some interesting stuff happening in this country with the kind of funding that is available to private schools or to private religious schools, because, you know, technically for a school to receive taxpayer funding, it has to meet certain criteria that a religious school probably would not qualify for. And so there's been some interesting legislation that has been put forth to attempt to change that. Specifically, I'm thinking of cases coming out of Oklahoma, and there's some stuff going down in California and a few other places as well. It's a really interesting conversation. All right, so this is a Polish article, and we're gonna do our best to get through what of it we can. This is about politics, but I wanted to talk about it because they mentioned the Heritage Foundation, and as you know, if you've been following me for a little while now, at least since, you know, summer of last year, then you would be aware of the connections that the Heritage Foundation has to Opus Dei, and you would also be aware of how impactful the Heritage Foundation has been on American policy and government here. So I wanted to go over this. And the headline says, Ordo Juris, which I am guessing on the pronunciation once more, will explain to Trump how to bring Europe down. And this was published March 13th. One wonders whether Ordo Juris, an organization known for its relationship with the people of Vladimir Putin, is the best representation of Polish interests in Washington. But the accounts of members of most Polish parties from Opus Dei prevent activities that would block the implementation in Poland of a new wonderful world modeled on the Project 2025 strategy. Rafał Brzeski, calling himself an information war practitioner, announced that Ordo Juris, together with the Hungarian Matthias Corvinus Collegium, will present the ultra-conservative American think tank Heritage Foundation ideas for a new shape of the European Union. He also wrote about working on the agenda based on the findings of the V-Square website. In the push of Polish-American summit meetings, this information may go unnoticed, but we should not underestimate its importance. This is geopolitics, people. The Heritage Foundation was a radical creator of Project 2025, a program implemented by the Donald Trump administration after he took office. I don't know if that's factually 100% accurate. At last count, I believe I read something saying that he had implemented somewhere in the ballpark of like 30 different things from the Project 2025 white paper, but I am sure there's not been any like official statement made that like the Project 2025 white paper is like the guiding paper for this administration. I have not heard anything like that. But I digress. During the election campaign, the organization proved to be too radical even by the standards of such an unconventional policy after the publication of a 922-page document in 2003, which is the foundation of the changes taking place in the USA. Trump said that he has no idea about the people behind it. Let's see, there's something else in here. 50 Days of Conservative Authoritarianism. They talk about Franklin D. Roosevelt, 1933. They said the 100 Days of Rule became the barometer of the new president's agency after the election of Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1933, when the next spasm of the U.S. Great Depression saved itself from imposing customs duties on imports and withdrew from the role of guarantor of peace in Europe. It says there's still a lot of time until the second presidential prom, Trump on April 30th, but given the implementation, 92 out of 300, so it's more now, of Project 2025 demands, it must be admitted that the new authorities are working at full capacity. And now those conversations with the organizations that are connected to that whole thing, the Heritage Foundation, namely, whose president receives spiritual counseling at the Catholic Information Center in Washington, D.C., and who is close friends with people like Leonard Leo and Peter Thiel and everybody else, it's going global. So good to keep an eye on, good to be aware of, just to be an informed citizen. So if you want to go read this thing in more detail, it's linked down below. Moving along. All right, so this is from the news site InfoBay. The alleged sexual abuse of minors in an Opus Dei school in Valencia remains stagnant in court. Quote, they doubt the testimony of children. InfoBay Spain talks to the mother of 2 children who would have been assaulted by a teacher at the El Vedat school in Torrent, ensures that families are outraged at the passivity of justice despite the seriousness of the events. This was published March 15th. More than a year has passed since the families of several students of the concerted school El Vedat de Torrent in Valencia, linked to Opus Dei, denounced sexual abuse by a teacher from the center to their children, saying that justice hasn't done anything yet. Investigations began in March 2024 after families reported that their children had suffered touching episodes of exhibitionism and even fellatio involving a teacher from this school of segregated education, which belongs to the promotion of teaching centers. But in all this time, the families regret the only thing that has been done is to question the victim's account. Alarms went off when some children started talking of sexualized behaviors among students that included touching and even fellatio. Quote, the first to speak was my youngest son, who was 5 years old and told us that there was a classmate who performed fellatio on others under the table in the dining room, and as a result, we were pulling the thread, he explains to InfoBay Spain. One of the mothers whose children has also been allegedly abused. After discussing it with other families, a father of another student narrated a similar fact, but this time it involved a teacher. When the father went to the school to ask for explanations, they just told him that it was impossible, that it would have been a child's nightmare, which was the indignant account from the phone. Families decided to investigate further and then compiled testimonies of more children than they were, and that they were targeting the same man. More children who said they were targeted by the same man, who was bald, short, wore a plaid shirt, and had shown them the pilila, and who even they had seen in the bathroom with a child. A profile explains EOV with which several men coincide at school. They are 5 years old, recounting very serious events, but even if they are very small and details such as names escape them, that does not mean they are making it up, adds this mother. And that is absolutely correct. I read a statistic very recently here that, and I think it's from like NCMEC or something like that, but it was saying that basically kids making up saying that somebody assaulted them, hurt them, abused them, and that not being true only accounts for 2% of cases that children bring forward. So children only lie about this kind of thing like 2% of the time, a very, very small like margin. So that means that 99% of the time, or 98% of the time, these kids are telling the truth and they should be believed. And it's nice that the statistics at least can show us that kids are not lying about that kind of thing. And it's crazy that they would continue to be doubted. Finally, after the testimony of somewhat older children who pointed to a Valencian teacher as the author of the abuses, the school decided to suspend the teacher. They suspended the teacher, but not because they believed that this had happened, but because of the commotion that had been generated. The families did not hesitate to immediately remove their children from school as soon as they knew the facts, and also denounced the teacher. The first time was in December 2023 before the courts, an institution that has only delayed the entire process and has done nothing for the victims. Proceedings began in March of last year, so the case leads paralyzed for a year in court. So it just has done nothing. Quote, we feel anger and outrage because also the parents that we have denounced believe that the abuses have been happening for years, but the school is used to this happening. It is silent, it covers it, and nothing happens. Now, however, it has gotten out of hand, and what they use so that we are not believed is to say that they are very young children, that things can be invented, and that they see a lot on the internet or that they have it at home. The woman regrets that it even costs so much to believe victims of sexual violence, even more when they are minors, and insists that in this case it is not only Opus Dei who has not protected these children, but the judicial system. At the moment, her children have not yet been able to tell their story before the courts. The only thing this causes is to lengthen the suffering of the victims, re-victimize them, because my children, all they want is to forget as soon as possible, but they are not left, adds this mother, while clarifying that the Dean Judge of Torrent is a member of Opus Dei. Really, really sad situation. I'm unfortunately not surprised to hear about this. And I've said this before, and I think this is true. And I'm working on some stuff now that at some point down the line, I'm hoping to present something a little bit more complete about the issue of CSA in Opus Dei, but I personally am convicted that there is a CSA issue in this organization. That is my opinion. That is my belief. I don't know that for sure. I haven't seen it with my own eyes, but based on everything that I am reading, based on everything that I am hearing, the people that I am talking to, that is my perspective. That is what I believe. And I did a video, an episode many, many years back now, talking about CSA and Opus Dei, and we're well overdue for a revamp of that topic, a refresh, as it were, because unfortunately the situation is just, it's continuing to go on. All right, another article. Legionaries of Christ priest accused of abusing five schoolgirls in Spain. This was published on March 13th from Madrid, Spain. Again, I wanted to include this because the Legionaries of Christ are on my radar now. Father Marcelino de Andres Nunez, a priest of the Legionaries of Christ and former secretary of Marcial Maciel, was arrested in Spain and released subject to restrictions, accused of abusing 5 underage girls at a school where he served as a primary and secondary school chaplain. Maciel, the founder of Legionaries of Christ, sexually abused at least 60 minors, most between the ages of 11 and 16, according to a report issued by the Legionaries of Christ in December 2019. According to several statements released by Highlands El Enseñar School in recent days, Spain's national police arrested De Andres on March 6th, initially accused of sexually abusing 1 female student. Upon learning of the events, the school activated the Safe Environment Protocol for cases of sexual abuse reported against a Legionary of Christ, the last approved version of which dates back to February 2023. Within hours of informing parents of the arrest, 4 more complaints were received, and the school sent a new communication to parents responding to the main questions received during that period. Highland School explained that the priest arrived at the school in September 2022 to fill a vacancy and that he presented a certificate stating that he had no criminal record for sexual offenses. The school stated the priest was hired despite his known ties to the founder of Regnum Christi and the Legionaries of Christ, Maciel, quote, because there was no history of inappropriate behavior against minors that would prevent him from carrying out his work in an educational center, end quote. De Andres was released March 8th, subject to restrictions by the judge, who imposed several precautionary measures. He was prohibited from getting within 300 meters, almost 1,000 feet, of the school, from approaching or communicating with the underage girls who complained, from engaging in any activity that involves regular and direct contact with minors, and from leaving the country. Furthermore, the judge ordered the priest to surrender his passport, and he appointed his sister and a criminal lawyer to defend him. De Andres is the author of numerous books in Spanish, including Joseph of Nazareth, A Man After God's Own Heart, What Are You Waiting For to Be Happy, Tales of Hope, and Give Him Wings, More Than 100 Ways to Love. You know, who knows whether De Andres was a victim of Maciel's? There's no, who knows? And I don't want to speculate about that kind of thing happening to someone, but Maciel, it seems, left such a wake of destruction after him. The things that he did, the actions that he took, and the people that he harmed have just had a ripple effect across society. And I feel like this is just another example of another ripple spreading out from this guy and causing harm as a result. I have an entire standalone episode dedicated to the Legionaries of Christ. If you're interested and if you don't know very much about that organization, you can go and find it. All right, so this is a Mexican news site, I believe, Diario del Istmo, It's a column. Oil of the Last Right in Mexico. I wanted to read this because it mentions some, organizations and things, but it talks about Opus Dei's, or the United States activities in these countries. And I always think that it's interesting just to read about other people from other countries' perspectives on the things that the United States government has done in meddling in foreign affairs, basically. And there are some interesting things in here. This is a little bit of a dicey translation, so bear with me as I make my way through this. But it starts. So this was written March 16th. The far right is a political spectrum of conservative currents with hostile positions toward liberal democracy. However, the origins and ideas help us to understand within the national environment its characteristics, evolution, and structures of political, economic, media, and religious power. In Mexico, the origins of the far right, Dayton de la Colonia, it switched over to, I keep switching back over to Spanish. I wish I was fluent enough to just read it and translate it in real time and just read it from the Spanish, because that would be so much easier. And if anybody knows of a good translation tool that's not Google Translate and that's not AI, I would love to hear about it. I don't know if this is gonna. Here we go. Yeah. So where was I? So the first formal education, which was clandestine, is the Union of Mexican Catholics, as a secret group of far right that emerged in Morelia as an organization that wanted to maintain ecclesiastical influence in the state. It was founded in 1915 by the Archdiocese of Michoacan in order to influence the society. The organization to which it was preceded, the National Union of Parents, or UNPF, promoted the interests of parents, and the ACJM, the Catholic Association of Mexican Youth, educated and hosted by the Knights of Columbus and Opus Dei, supported by the government, accompanies their private NGOs. After the Cristero War and the Reform War, the trench of the far right in Mexico was held at private universities, particularly from... Thanks, it refreshed and I lost what I was talking about. Particularly from the socialist educational model promoted by Lázaro Cárdenas. The first private university was formed in Mexico, the Autonomous University of Guadalajara, and with it would come a clandestine association called Los Ceilings, which sought, quote, to form youth movements to fight for control of higher education institutions, end quote. The movement was inspired by an anti-Semitic ideology and had been radicalized during the founders' trips to Nazi Germany and the Spanish Phalange. They adopted symbols, rituals of paramilitary structure. Other organizations born in the Mexican universities of the 50s were the Anvil. It adopts its name as an antithesis of the hammer, a firm and immovable object. It originated in Puebla. The main mission was to establish the kingdom of Christ on earth. Furthermore, it was also considered as an anti-communist group, secret groups of organizations of far-right origin. They blamed them for having participated in political assassinations and murders in the 1960s and 70s. However, its relevance has grown over the years, and despite its clandestine and reserved nature. Alvaro Delgado, journalist in the process of yesteryear and author of 2 books on the Anvil, assures that they came very close to power in Mexico during the PAN presidencies. Particularly mentioned is the case of Carlos Abascal, Secretary of the Interior with Vicente Fox and son of Salvador Abascal, one of the founders of the synarchist movement. Another organization or group, the WAL, the University Movement of Renovadora Orientación. It arose in the years of ideological dispute at UNAM. They are born in a confrontation between Fidel Castro's followers and anti-Castro students in July 26, 1961. Manuel Buendia explained that it was a movement founded by the 12 Apostles, a group of businessmen from Puebla who sought to control education in Mexico, fighting through the young militants against, quote, the dogmatic and blind Marxism-Leninism, end quote, from the former superior of Julio Scherer. The MURO, M-U-R-O, had quite visible participations in marches and repressive acts. against leftist movements, the guerrillas in various parts of the country, the 1968 student movement, the 70s and 80s Cold War, and they tried to immobilize social protest, being allies to the government, business, media, and religion. And it goes on to describe other groups. There's another one here. I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit. These organizations in Mexico have fed conservative political groups and parties in a context where there are false concerns about security, corruption, and the economy promoted by the neoliberal governments of the period of 1988 to 2018. The National Action Party, together with paramilitary groups, businessmen, and the church, led the laundering of organized and white-collar crime money. Party colluded later with the PRI and the PRD and devastating the energy sector and delivering the food system to large transnational agribusinesses and a global market economy. With the circulation of fake news and hate speech polarizing the society on social networks, it has facilitated the amplification of the voices of the far right. This translates into a more tense political climate to curb and repress those who oppose not only their nation project, but also progressive social and cultural changes. In the current context, the influence of conservatives is also evident in elections and in public opinion, in contentment with the mass media and its analysts, program leaders, causing citizens discontent toward the regime change that has operated since 2019. However, it will be crucial for the country's political future the response of other sectors of Mexican society. So I thought that was interesting because it's just talking about these different groups and how they work in Mexican society and in Mexican government. Of course, it mentioned Opus Dei there at one point, which I thought was interesting. They always pop up though in South America, so that's not really a surprise. It's good to just be aware. I bring this up just to illustrate again the fact that there are multiple groups out there who are invested in furthering their own agenda, and they form alliances with different groups at different points whenever it serves their goal, whatever their goal may be, and whether that's because they allied with a government or a social group or a religion or whatever. There's lots. All right. So, moving right along. I've been going for a hot minute here, so I'm trying to hurry up a little bit. So this is an article that is critical of the heroic minute. I'm not going to read the entire thing. I'm just going to read the first little bit just because I think it's absurd. The headline, this was written March 19th. The headline reads, "The Heroic Minute in Opus Dei, the Bias of Small Samples and Their Impact on Our Perception." Daniel Kahneman, in his book Quick Think, Slow Think, exposes how our brain has a tendency to draw conclusions from small samples, generating biased interpretations of reality. So, talking about this book, and he said a clear example of this is found in Chapter 8, The Law of Small Numbers, where it is explained that the reduced samples usually generate extreme and unrepresentative results. Which can be true. You should definitely, if you're ever, from a scientific perspective, if you're ever looking at a study, the size of the study, the number of participants in it, should definitely be taken into consideration when you're trying to determine whether or not the study is good quality or should be taken at full weight. Let's see. I really hate how this keeps bouncing back to Spanish. Again, if anybody knows of any kind of good software that I could use, please let me know. So, then he gives a bunch of different examples, exaggerated variability, limited data, false patterns. All that is very true. It's very easy to manipulate data, to manipulate statistics, to get it to look like it is saying whatever you want it to say. But in the application to social perceptions and testimonies, the article says, this bias can also be seen in how we interpret personal stories and testimonies. For example, in the case of the Heroic Minute related to Opus Dei, many testimonies reflect experiences of dedication and commitment, while others point to difficulties or manipulations. In both cases, individual experiences can be representative only of a subset of reality and not of the entire institution. The tendency to generalize from particular cases is a direct consequence of the illusion of patterns. Now, that is true. The tendency to generalize from particular cases is a direct consequence of the illusion of patterns. That is true. But that is why, in situations like this, it's important that we step back and look at the accounts and testimonies from former members critically, examine them critically, and examine the situation and make sure that what these people are saying is happening isn't actually happening, and if it is happening, that something is being done to help them. In and of itself, I don't think you should ever make a sweeping generalization about anything based off of a small handful of experiences or a small data set, right? You shouldn't make sweeping generalizations. What you should do is take that information, and this guy would know this, if he. All right, I'm trying to get back. I am experiencing some real technical difficulties, so thank you for bearing with me. Oh, technology. It's wonderful when it works. All right, it looks like I am back streaming as far as I can tell. It looks like I am back, so I'm gonna keep going and hope that all of this makes it into the stream, just so that I can get through this and wrap this up. Thank you for bearing with me. Bring my page back up. All right. So, moving on. Survivors of abuse in the church, indigenous organizations denounce anti-NGO law as a gag to achieve justice. These organizations are rejecting the law passed by Congress and are denouncing that it harms victims in addition to weakening struggles for human and territorial rights. This is out of Peru. This was published on March 19th. Survivors of abuse in the Peruvian Catholic Church and indigenous organizations have expressed a resounding rejection of the so-called anti-NGO law passed by Congress, alleging that it seriously weakens its ability to access justice and opens the door to impunity for corrupt authorities who could violate human rights without consequences. Come on. The Peru Survivors Network, an organization dedicated to the defense of victims of abuse in ecclesiastical settings, denounced through a statement that the norm seeks to protect those responsible for these crimes by restricting access to essential international resources to carry out impartial investigations. Quote, after a facade of search for transparency and oversight, the real objective is to silence civil society. In the specific case of the objectives of our association, the political forces with a presence in the Congress have allied themselves with powerful religious organizations such as the Sodalicio, Opus Dei, and many Christian churches to promote anti-right agendas that seek to silence victims and survivors of sexual violence, end quote, it read in its pronouncement. Jose Enrique Escardo, president of the organization and first complainant of Sodalicio, stressed that the law not only discriminates against victims without resources, but also prevents organizations from bringing their cases before international courts such as the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, especially if the state does not comply with demands such as the creation of a truth commission on sexual abuse of minors in the Catholic Church. So, I'm not going to read this whole thing, again, moving right along, but I wanted to highlight the fact that this is something that's happening in Peru. It's something that's happening around the world. I'm seeing in my own country, in the UK, in South America, I'm seeing legislation being suggested that is just, it's anti-human rights. There's no other way to describe it. It's just anti-human rights on the face of it. Now it is time to talk about my favorite Icelandic Opus Dei bishop. The Spanish bishop of Opus Dei of Helsinki reveals why his church is, quote, the fastest growing in Europe. This is a really interesting situation, and I have been kind of keeping an eye on it now for the last couple of years ago or so, since this Remo Goyarola was sent to Iceland to be the bishop of the, I guess, diocese there, the Catholic community that is in Iceland. And it's really interesting. In this article, we're going to read through some of it. It's interesting. But this guy, priest of Opus Dei, has been made the Vicar General of the Diocese of Helsinki on Friday, September 29th, 2023. And then that was when he received the news of his appointment as Bishop of the Finnish capital by Pope Francis. So he was born in Bilbao in 1969. He arrived in Finland long before his appointment in 2006, following the express request of the then titular Bishop Joseph Roble for a priest of Opus Dei. So they specifically, this Bishop Joseph specifically asked for a priest of Opus Dei. Doctor trained and ordained in 2002, Goriola fell in love with the Nordic country, and now that's where he's at. In Finland, there are only about 17,000 registered Catholics, although the bishop says that the figure exceeds 30,000 in a population of 5.5 million. So that's between 3 to 5% of the population being Catholic. It says the priest took his first steps in the country accompanying young people, with whom he started the first university residence in the capital. Since then, he served as a chaplain in the residence, assistant to the university ministry in Helsinki, teacher of religious education in various schools, and military chaplain, among other tasks. He soon learned to defend himself with the language and deal with other aspects that, instead of calling them difficulties, he prefers to see as challenges and opportunities to evangelize. He has a book that he wrote, Break the Ice, Stories of a Catholic Priest in Finland. So he is capitalizing off of his unique situation. There it is there. And on the occasion of its publication, the bishop visited Spain and was received at Religion and Freedom to talk about what he considers a story of hope, love, and challenges. Let's see. The bishop hopefully summarizes his present and future illusions, among them to found a Catholic school or retreat house. The reforms needed by the church's infrastructures in Finland are millionaire, but he prefers to laugh and trust. In the end, everything is to take it easy and have a positive attitude, he comments. Let's see. They have challenges. They must be overcome. You have to jump. Our biggest challenge is a family growing up in a large country with scattered Catholics, offering places, chapels, churches, a school, a house to meet and to pray, to do exercises and retreats. The challenge is positive, a blessing, because we grow a lot, but it needs a solution. Something that I'm just going to continue to keep an eye on. The Opus Dei presence in Iceland is interesting. And Iceland is a pretty liberal country, from what I understand. The people that I've talked to have told me that it is. So I don't know how well an organization like Opus Dei would do in a country like that, but I've also been told by people from Iceland that there is a pretty good-sized community of like immigrants, people from other countries, including Latin America, moving to Iceland, and that is where a lot of the religiosity, I guess, for lack of a better term, is kind of coming up from. And I would bet that this bishop is looking to capitalize on that population of people and on the fact that they share a common, are more likely to share a common culture. Maybe it would be easier to introduce Opus Dei topics and increase an Opus Dei presence. I don't know. I'm purely speculating here, but that is something that I've been thinking every single time I see another article talking about this guy and what he's doing in Iceland and in Helsinki and why he's so excited about it. And now it's the fastest growing church in Europe and blah, blah, blah. Like, it feels to me like this guy and what he is doing, the entire situation in Iceland, it's being held up as an example of something right now in like mainstream church world, you know, like within the Catholic Church, maybe just within Opus Dei. It feels like what he's doing is being held up as like an example, and I'm not exactly sure what it's an example of yet. Like, this is all kind of happening in real time, these like efforts and what he's doing, and I'm getting it secondhand from a news article that is kind of clumsily translated, and you guys are getting it third. So who's to say for sure what's actually going on? But it's something that I wonder about. All right, one of the last articles that we will be translating here. We are getting down to the bottom finally. So many articles to get through. I gotta be honest, I am playing with the idea of increasing this from being a monthly thing to a bi-weekly thing, just because there is so much material to get through by the end of a month that, like, I'm sitting here streaming. I've been streaming for like 2 hours, and I could probably continue to talk for another hour. And I think there's going to be stuff I'm going to have to cut out just because I don't want to sit here any longer. So let me know what you think about that. Let me know if you have an opinion one way or the other. I want to get through all this stuff. I want to talk about all this stuff because I think it's important, but there's so much that, like, you just don't have the time. Just doing it once a month is what I think I'm coming to grips with. But this was published March 24th. This is from Mexico. Women join complaints against Opus Dei for labor exploitation. This was written by Gloria Pina and Paula Pistadino. Women who worked without wages, Social Security, or rest in Opus Dei facilities denounce that due to various abuses and labor exploitation, they live with depression and have experienced suicide attempts. 8 Mexican women who were part of Opus Dei as NACs, I'm going to abbreviate it to NACs just to make it easier, the category corresponding to domestic service, they sent a letter to the vicar of the religious institution before the disqualification of testimonies and allegations of exploitation, forced labor, and submission and human trafficking within the organization. Quote, "Do you know what is behind all those services that you enjoy daily?" End quote, is the question with which they start the letter addressed to Carlos Antonio Nunez Espiro, vicar of the Prelature of the Holy Cross and Opus Dei in Mexico, of which Political Animal has a copy. The complaints against Opus Dei have crossed borders as more and more are added, complaints from auxiliary numeraries not only in Mexico but also in other countries in Latin America, Europe, and the United States. The series A Heroic Minute by Catalan journalist Monica Terribas, who premiered on the Max platform on February 7th, presented the testimonies of 13 women from different countries that from the 80s to the 2000s were part of the Catholic organization in different categories. 2 of them belonged as NACs, which was the way in which a poor woman and which is the membership for poor women, and submitted them as maids and work without recognition and remuneration for residences and institutions such as domestic service of elite members. The signatories of the letter speak of the need to remunerate the work of the NACs, who for years give their lives to the cleaning and care of the facilities of the Opus Dei, in addition to the insensitivity with which the Prelature in Mexico has disqualified their complaints and testimonies. On this occasion, the NACs do so through a joint official positioning using only the initials of their names, since after reporting, the Political Animal received threats from the Catholic institution. So they're having to anonymize these people because they're getting threats and being harassed by, it says, the Catholic institution. I'm assuming they mean Opus Dei. The women support the complaints made in Political Animal as well as in the Max series because despite the geographical and temporal differences, the stories are the same. Confinement, conditions, work of more than 12 hours a day, in addition to being sent without consent to other territories of the country. They claim that due to abuse and exploitation, several of them lived with disorders of depression and even experienced suicide attempts. They add that in Opus Dei, there is no interest in the health status of the NACs who suffer from forced labor health problems, and that even led to diagnosis of chronic diseases. Quote, "You men only know that we exist because you have the services resolved." End quote. They tell priests and lay numerary men residing in the houses of the work, whom the NACs serve almost tirelessly daily. No family forces their dearest daughter to work more than 14 hours a day without Social Security, without a real salary, and at the service of the needs of the others 24/7. They report in the letter referring to what they receive, to that they receive the appointment of daughters or sisters, little ones of the religious fraternity. And of course, they say Opus Dei never intended to harm members of the spiritual family. That is in quotes again from this Nunez Espiro guy. And again, I say that it doesn't matter what your intentions were. What matters is reality. In the report, The Maids of God, published in Political Animal, 3 Mexican women reported how they were captured from an early age, including some being minors, to be trained as professional servants and then forced to work without retribution through emotional manipulation and intimidation. In Mexico, there is a record of at least 6 boarding schools where low-income girls from the ages of 14 were recruited with the promise of receiving educational training and hospitality. These are found in the states of Morelos, Jalisco, State of Mexico, Coahuila, Tlaxcala, and Mexico City. However, while studying in these educational centers far from their families, they were forced to have a vocation as nags, and some spent 10 to 40 years cleaning the houses, making food, and providing services without obtaining financial payment. So more people are joining the initial 3 Mexican women that spoke out, and I think that that is good, because you need support when you are attempting to get justice for something like that, and there's strength in numbers. So I will continue to be keeping an eye on that situation as well. All right, last but not least, or second to last but not least, this article here. I believe more Mr. Cipriani, Rafael Lopez Aliaga, insists on defending the ex-Archbishop of Lima accused of sexual abuse. So this is the mayor of Lima who belittled Juan Luis Cipriani's complainant, calling him NN because of his anonymous status, and saying that he believes Cipriani more because the individual who said that Cipriani abused him is doing so under the veil of anonymity. Let's see. He says that, for me, everyone is innocent until their guilt is proven in due process. That is the ABC of law. Everyone in the Vatican or anywhere in the world has the right to due process. I believe more of the person who is suffering, and he says that, in his opinion, that person is Mr. Cipriani, which is really interesting. You may remember that a while back, Cipriani received a award. He went back to Lima, Peru, after he had been removed from his position. He went back to Lima, Peru, and got an award, some type of civil award or something that was presented by the mayor to Cipriani. And of course, Cipriani and the mayor both have ties to Opus Dei. So birds of a feather kind of flock together, maybe. I don't know. But I wanted to include that just because I thought it was crazy that Cipriani came back to Peru after having been gone, was given an award by this guy. Cipriani was in Opus Dei, is in Opus Dei. This guy has connections to Opus Dei. It's so clear to me what's going on from the outside looking in, that there are clear conflicts of interest here, and it's pretty clear that these people are not the most reliable narrators in the world, definitely. At the very least, at the worst, they are supporting somebody who allegedly has done some really terrible things. So I wanted to mention that. I think it's important to highlight that connection between religious people who are involved in Opus Dei and civil people, people who are in positions within civil society who have connections to Opus Dei. And then it gets really interesting when they have connections directly to each other, as Cipriani and the mayor do. All right. Now, last but not least, this is super important. I wanted to make sure that I mentioned it. I had some posts from the Opus Dei Exposed community pulled up that I wanted to get through, but I don't think that we honestly have time today, so I'm going to save that for another time. But this one I am going to read, and then I'm going to read the subsequent news article because it's a pretty big deal. This was 18 days ago. Priests from Opus Dei International Seminary submit complaint. So the OP here writes, priests from Latin America who did their seminary studies at the Navarre, northern Spain seminary run by Opus Dei called Bedasoa, submit a group complaint to the bishops of Spain, the dicastery for clergy, and the Pope. They charge that although the seminary is supposed to be preparing seminarians for the diocesan priesthood, in fact, indoctrinated them in a sectarian approach in which they only heard about the founder and Alvaro del Portillo endlessly. Their spiritual directors were required to be priests of Opus Dei. They were assigned to serve in parishes where the priests were Opus Dei affiliated, associate priests of the prelature of Opus. They were not exposed to information about other religious orders and lay movements in the church. They were prohibited from speaking to the Naxas who did the housekeeping and table serving for them, even to say good morning or thank you. When they returned to their home diocese, they were pursued relentlessly by Opus Dei priests to come to Opus activities, get Opus spiritual direction, recruit parishioners to Opus activities, etc. They believe that their home bishops sold them, evidently meaning that Bidassoa gives scholarships to seminarians from developing countries, and in exchange expects the seminarians to become sectarian Opus fanatics. These priests submitted this letter to coincide with a meeting of the Spanish Episcopal Conference. On the agenda at that meeting is whether to continue to promote/endorse Bidassoa as a model for seminary studies in Spain. And here's the article that the OP linked, and I've got it pulled up right here. Bishops receive an anonymous letter of alleged alumni with complaints against Bidassoa. They ask the Episcopal Conference to intervene at the seminary. They criticize that they are now allowed to speak to women and that the practices are carried out with priests of Opus Dei. So this document, or this article, is linked, and you can read it if you want to, but it basically just says what I went over in this post. And I wanted to mention this because we've been hearing a lot from former female members of the organization, and there's a really, really good reason for that, clearly. But that's not to say that men have also not experienced unfortunate things in this organization or through interacting with this organization in places like this seminary, because clearly that is not the case. I mean, there are plenty of stories. I've read stories on this channel from former male members who recount the same types of coercion and spiritual abuse and manipulation that the women have experienced. They just were slotted into different places within the organization. But everyone has their predetermined designated spot. And if you don't fit into that spot, you'll ground a square peg into a round hole, I guess, if you have to. And finally, we're starting to see some more press from men who have been negatively impacted by their experiences with Opus Dei. So I wanted to mention that and include that in this live stream, just because I think that it's really, really important. And I'm going to continue to keep an eye on this, and we'll see what more comes out in the weeks ahead. But I am doing this live stream on April 15th, so clearly I did not get to do it at the end of the month like I usually do. I've had some stuff in my personal life that has just kind of kept me away, and then I was on vacation for a little while because all work and no play makes me a very dull person. So I'm kind of getting back into the groove of everything, and I wanted to do last month's newsroom analysis first before anything else, just because this is something that I think is really important. I want to make sure that I can continue to emphasize the importance of this type of coverage and the media and everything, and the importance of being an informed, aware citizen. So that is kind of the situation, and I appreciate the patience that everyone has given me. I know it's been a while since I have uploaded. I am still working on projects, and good stuff takes time. So I appreciate all of the patience, and I appreciate everyone who tuned in for this newsroom analysis here today. Like the banner up at the top said, if you are interested in connecting with me on any of my social media or supporting my work in any way, links to do that are down below. The link or the document with all of the links for all of the articles that we went over today is listed down below. There might also be some other things in there that I didn't get a chance to go over just because we ran out of time. So take a look at that if you are interested. I'm assuming if you watched this stream, that means that you are already subscribed, because otherwise you wouldn't have gotten the notification. But if you are catching this after the fact and you are not yet subscribed, please consider doing so, giving this channel this video episode a thumbs up. It helps a whole lot, and I appreciate all of the support from everyone up until now. But I think that is where I'm going to conclude things for today. We have been going for a hot minute, so I am not expecting everybody who started with me to still be here, but I appreciate everybody's thoughts during this live stream. Keep on keeping on, and like I always say, Nolite te bastardes carborum, don't let the bastards drag you down.